F1 on BBC Radio 5 Sports Extra.
Less than a week on from the opening round of the 2025 Formula One season, and we are straight back to action for round two from the Shanghai International Circuit. It's the Chinese Grand Prix weekend, and joining myself, Harry Benjamin, for the first practice session and the only practice session of the weekend is the racing driver Alice Powell and the BBC's F1 correspondent Andrew Benson. Now, before we properly dive into the on-track action, you would have all heard or seen the sad news that Eddie Jordan, the flamboyant former Formula One team owner and later television pundit, has sadly died at the age of 76 after battling prostate cancer. Andrew, this is a man who has had such a profound impact on Formula One. It's a heavy loss for the sport.
Indeed, Eddie Jordan was a life force. He was mad, he was chaotic, he was funny, he was a bit dodgy. He was the archetypal lovable rogue, and everybody in Formula One knew him. And even though he was, he double-crossed a few of them along the way, he lit up a room, and everybody really liked him. And I spent yesterday thinking of all the stories that I wanted to tell but couldn't tell because they were too X-rated. But Alice has worked with him as well at Channel 4. We both had a lot of fun and had our eyes wide open by some of his antics. So he'll be sadly missed.
Everyone does talk about Eddie with a smile on their face more often than not, Alice. And as Andrew said, you work quite closely with him as a pundit in his sort of second career after being a boss.
Yeah, and you knew every time you walked into a room and you saw Eddie, you thought, well, this is going to be a fun day. And it was. He was just so full of life, laughter. Again, plenty of stories that I also can't repeat on air. But, you just knew you were going to have a great time. And he was also always willing to give you advice and help you in his own Eddie way, should I say.
Well, look, if you want to hear some stories that can be told about Eddie and his wonderful life and career, both on and off the track, you can head to BBC Sounds or your chosen podcast feed and check out the latest episode of the Checkered Flag podcast, where myself, Andrew, and we were joined by Gary Anderson, who designed the very first Jordan F1 car, and Mark Gallagher, who was instrumental in that team throughout the course of its life in Formula One, reflecting on the life and career of Eddie Jordan. So do head to that to check that out when you can. And indeed, Aston Martin, the team that really has the DNA of what Jordan F1 wants when it transitioned to Midland and Spiker, Force India, Racing Point, and even now the Aston Martin team may have a new headquarters based on the old site still in Silverstone. They have announced they're running a tribute this weekend on their car, running Eddie Jordan's name on their green livery. So very much a loss that is felt up and down the grid. But I'm sure Eddie Jordan would want us to carry on and talk about the racing, which is what we will do in this free practice session. And I mentioned there is only one session of the weekend because it's the first of the sprint events, once again starting off in China, where the sun is shining, blue skies above us, with a little bit of wind as well. The flags on the top of the main pit building aflutter. And so, Alice, as always with a sprint weekend, it's usually pretty hectic.
Do you know what? I'm going to be one of these people that's probably going to upset a few. I actually enjoy the sprint weekends, and I don't know whether I'm looking at Andrew now, almost flinching, ready for him to say, no, how could you? But I do. It's a different format. Of course, it's not a traditional Grand Prix weekend, but I think it just puts the drivers under a little bit more pressure. You only get this one free practice session, and then you're straight into sprint qualifying later on.
Do you know, I don't know why you say that about me, Alice. I actually quite enjoyed them too. I wouldn't want them every weekend.
We're all good.
But, I think I'm a bit conflicted about them, to be honest with you, because I think on the one hand, it feels like there's definitely a load more competitive action, because there is a load more competitive action. And so in some ways they feel more consequential, but in another way they feel a bit less consequential, because the competitive action is kind of like, what's it for, Anyway, we could talk about the pros and the cons of the sprints all day. We've got a few of them. I don't think anybody in Formula 1 wants them to be all of them, certainly not the drivers, and I think I kind of sit with the majority of the drivers. It's nice to have a few of them just to spice things up a bit.
I agree.
But not every weekend.
Absolutely. Well, in terms of how the sprint works, if you need a little reminder, we'll have 6 of them throughout the year, this being the first of them. Then we'll have another sprint in Miami, Spa, Austin, Qatar and Brazil will host the remaining. And what happens is we just have the one Friday practice session, which has just got underway now, green light on at the end of the pit lane, and I'll do a sync up in just a few moments time. And then later on this afternoon we'll go qualifying for the sprint race, and then Saturday consists of that sprint race, and then it's traditional Grand Prix qualifying from Saturday afternoon, and then the Sunday Grand Prix as normal, unaffected. So we get a double dosage of racing in China, and the clock has began to tick down. 59 minutes and 19 seconds remain. Now, off the back of round one, Alice, there's a lot to learn off of the chaos, really, that Melbourne threw up. A wet to dry, wet again, then back to dry. It was an absolutely enthralling race, but no matter what the conditions, it seemed like McLaren were a cut above the rest.
It is. It's still very early days, for sure. We've only, of course, had one race weekend, but they've started strong, and the good thing for McLaren, at least at the moment, is they've got 2 drivers up there, whereas Liam Lawson had a pretty shocking first race weekend for his new team, and that's going to massively help as long as they keep it clean with each other. They got very close at times last year, but that's certainly going to help having both of them up there. But we were saying off air how good a job Max Verstappen did, and now people have said in the past, well, he's got the best car, but I managed to find deeping and diving into the internet his onboard from when it was starting to rain, when he was on slicks, and it's super impressive. He's almost superhuman. To drive a Formula 1 car when it's dry on slicks is hard enough, to then put some moisture down on the circuit. It was hugely impressive, and I know Lando got the driver of day voted by the fans, but I think for just keeping it on the road and taking that gamble, okay, it didn't pay off for Max, but he did an outstanding job, and we can't rule him out. But at the moment, of course, McLaren look the title favourites at the moment.
Yeah, there's no question about that. George Russell said some things yesterday that caused a few eyes to pop open, where he said that McLaren's advantage is bigger than Red Bull's ever was, and I think that's quite a bold claim. One wet race into a season, and one pre-season testing over 3 days. There's no doubt that McLaren looks like the best car, but I think it'd be very, very wrong to make some kind of rash prediction, and I think it is a rash prediction about to something like that. Oscar Piastri, if I can just find the quote that he gave about that remark, which I can't at the moment. I'll come back to that. Anyway, he basically said he didn't think it was, it was a bit bold. I mean, Alice is absolutely right. Max Verstappen was outstanding in the wet. He's always outstanding in the wet. He has had the best car for a couple of years in 22 and 23. But, he didn't have it for last year, and we all saw his quality holding on to that lead in the championship. But every track is different, and McLaren know that there'll be some tracks where they're going to struggle, or expect there'll be some tracks where they'll struggle more. This, though, isn't one of them. This is a track that should play to the strengths of the McLaren car. So let's see how it unfolds.
Well, let's talk about this track a little bit more, Alice, because actually a lot of the drivers very positive about this track, particularly Fernando Alonso during Thursday Media Day, calling it the best layout in terms of driving, because it really does have a real eclectic mix of sectors. You've got the long straight down to turn 1, and then already you're off to a really unique start, because you have a 270-degree corner which loops you round to the right before you then immediately come back the other way on yourself, which the Williams, I should say, of Alex Albon has just found himself going wide into the gravel and made his way back onto the circuit. It's a tricky and technical circuit.
It is, and it's certainly that first sector tests that left-hand side tyre. It's long, and it feels like, when's this corner going to end? Certainly on a qualifying lap, if you haven't got those front tyres in, then you will lack the grip, and this might be what we're going to see happen to Alex Albon. There was a car on the inside inside, which I think distracted him slightly, and lack of tyre temperature. This circuit has been fully refurbished since last year, so we've had a session out already this morning. The F1 Academy has been out, not that they do too much to the track, and Liam Lawson, they're all struggling around that first corner, very demanding, but there's a variety of corners, as you said, Harry. You've got the huge heavy braking zone down into turn 14. Liam Lawson off through the gravel on the exit of turn 3, so they're all struggling for grip early on in this session, and it's quite cool. The temperatures are fairly cool from what we're going to see later on today. Air temperatures at 22, that's expected to rise to 26, but yes, a nice mix of corners, low speed, medium and high.
Should say the track has been completely resurfaced ahead of this weekend. Here's Tsunoda on the radio.
The track is quite grippy compared to last year, much more.
I mean, try telling that, Yuki, to Liam and to Alex Albon. They may not agree with you at this stage.
We appreciate the timing of that radio message as well. Thank you very much, Yuki Tsunoda. So yeah, he commenting the track feels more grippy, but they have indeed resurfaced the entire circuit. So we'll see how that affects the early stages in free practice 1. This track just over 5.4 kilometres, 3.3 miles, 16 turns, 9 to the right and 7 to the left, reaching speeds of up to 321 kilometres per hour. It is fast and furious, but also has that technical middle sector as well, and then that long back straight, 1.4 kilometres.
There's something loose around my pedals.
It's Alex Albon on the radio commenting that there is something loose around his pedals, so we can expect to see him, I imagine, come back into the pits. But pretty much, indeed, every single driver is out there, because this is the one practice session they get. The sound you're listening to getting up to 330 kilometres an hour on that back straight is Kimi Antonelli, the Italian rookie for Mercedes, the man replacing Lewis Hamilton at the team. Makes his way round the final corner now, up through the gears for his first proper lap time, puts himself up into 8th, about a second off his teammate's time, George Russell, who is currently fastest, a 1:35.1, and it was a good race last time out for Kimi Antonelli after a tough qualifying.
Yeah, top rookie performance overall.
One of the only ones to survive.
Well, one of the only ones to survive, exactly, but he did an outstanding job. Of course, had that little spin early on in the race, but managed to avoid the wall, unlike quite a few of the others. But really, really good effort and job by Kimi. Got that penalty overturned as well, so was promoted slightly further up. So fantastic job by him, as we see Charles Leclerc starting his laps, sweeping round turn 1. And all these drivers trying to desperately get some space, and they've got to get on with it as well, Harry. Here, the track temperature will start to rise, but it's their only practice session before heading into sprint qualifying, so it's quite busy, quite a lot going on. Carlos Sainz in the Williams has jumped up into P1. Didn't get much running last time out, did he? Certainly in the race in Australia.
No, he didn't, but I think he proved his worth on the pit wall. The team saying that he may have been out of the race, but he very much was quite instrumental on the strategy side of things, and calling Alex Albon in for his second pit stop on when to switch to the intermediate tyre. So I think Sainz was obviously quite disappointed to miss out on what could have been a major result for Williams. They already had the P4, it was P4 of course, but then Kimi Antonelli got reinstated into 4th, which put Albon down to 5th, which is what Alex Albon's best result for Williams so far. What a start to their year. It does seem like in that midfield pack, Williams, perhaps Racing Bulls as well, are right up there, but this is a big leap forward so far if we're basing this off one round for the Williams team. No,
it certainly is. Charles Leclerc with a slight lock-up going out down into turn 14, but yeah, they were my ones to watch before the start of the season, and they seem to be living up to that at the moment, putting in a good stint. The track is going to develop through this practice session, so we can't look too much into the times at the moment as Max Verstappen jumps to the top spot, but they have got a very good driver combination, 2 talented and highly rated drivers there at Williams. And I know that they hugely value and respect Carlos Sainz for helping on the pit wall, which just shows, his heart is there. He wants to improve the team overall, and I think they can have a good season.
Well, at the moment, Sainz was P1, but the note that the way the track is improving, already down to 8th. It's 50 minutes and 13 seconds remain of free practice. Lando Norris is the fastest driver, a 1:33.362. Everybody out there on the medium tyre, he's less than a tenth ahead of George Russell. Then it's Verstappen. The two Ferraris of Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton round out the top 5. Now, for Ferrari, though, Alice, Australia was a bit of a weekend to forget, wasn't it? Just when you think they're starting to make incremental gains, we were watching them throughout the weekend. Leclerc looked strong at times and Hamilton was improving session after session. Sunday couldn't have gone any worse for them.
Disappointing for Ferrari massively, and the weather, of course, played a little bit of a part in that too. And they'll be looking to make huge gains this weekend, because going into pre-season, people were saying, well, hang on, they could really take it to your Red Bulls, your McLarens, but from the pace that they showed in Australia, that certainly wasn't the case. And Hamilton was clearly frustrated after and during the race as well last Sunday. So big disappointment for them. They'll be looking forward to try and rectify and find some pace as Oscar Piastri sweeps slightly wide down into turn 14. All seem to be struggling for grip down in that final part of the lap. But at the moment, Charles Leclerc 4th, Lewis Hamilton in 5th position, and they got quite close at times last weekend, didn't they? Wheel-to-wheel stuff between the two Ferrari drivers.
Certainly did, and a lot being made of the strategy that Ferrari employed, and both drivers with their interactions on the radio with their engineers. Let's hear from the 7-time champion Lewis Hamilton as he reflected on his opening race for the Ferrari team.
Well, I mean, it has only been one race, and of course, even for me, that's not the result that I was hoping for. In pure performance, to be where we were was not spectacular. There are definitely, I don't think the car is necessarily at that pace. We just didn't extract it all. And then the race on Sunday was disastrous. So definitely painful for all of us. I think you can't let one race throw you off. You can't quit after one race or one loss. We come back fighting, and that's what we do best. So coming in here this weekend, we're optimistic. We've got our heads high. We're going to continue to push. We've got a good car and a good package. There's 1,000 different things impacting race weekends, and the thing is, like, we could have made a call, for example, in the strategy last weekend. If I'd come in 2 laps before and we would finish higher up, it would be a different discussion, right? But we still were lacking performance. And I think it's just about having perspective. We don't have to have... Rome wasn't built in one day. So we're just going to try and build on the foundations from testing. Learned a huge amount from last weekend, and it's what we do with that loss. And it's how we turn up weekend in, weekend out with our heads high and continue to push. It's not how you fall, it's how you get back up.
Lewis Hamilton there speaking about his opening race for Ferrari. Andrew, Rome wasn't built in one day, but Ferrari have been trying to build back up for a championship since 2008. Do you think there is more to come from the team after round 1?
Well, it's hard to know, isn't it, Harry? The car looked really good. Hamilton's just gone fastest, by the way, which is encouraging for him, obviously. The car looked really, really good in pre-season testing. It sort of looked like second best behind the McLaren, but it was only testing. And it looked really good in practice in Australia. Here's Piastri's radio.
Oscar, how's the car?
It's okay. It's a bit nervous in the high speed.
It's Oscar Piastri saying he's got a bit of oversteer in the high-speed corners. Have to dial that out. So and it looked good through practice in Australia and through the first 2 parts of qualifying, and then it all went away from them in Q3. Now, the story is that maybe they had to raise the car, and that threw them off in terms of setup. That doesn't kind of make sense if it's quick in Q1 and 2 but not in Q3. The story is also that they had some problem with the tyres through qualifying, which is true of other people as well. Basically it's true of everybody except McLaren. They were the team that could keep their tyres in shape, and that's basically how they qualified so dominantly last weekend, because the tyres were still working well in the last sector. Wet races are tricky, aren't they? They started in a bad place, down the grid, 7th and 8th, the Ferrari drivers. Overtaking was hard in Australia, so they were kind of stuck there. They didn't show any massive pace, but then it's hard to know what their pace could have been if they were running in clear air. Having said that, Hamilton was definitely struggling from time to time. He said yesterday he thought his radio conversations with Riccardo Adami, his race engineer, who was previously Carlos Sainz's race engineer, and before that Sebastian Vettel's, were over-egged. The discussions about the debates and disagreements they were having, and I agree with him on that one. It's just two people getting to know each other, and it was a particularly tricky race to have your first Grand Prix with a team. But there are obviously some key takeaways. One is, what on earth happened to the pace of the car? Was that the true reflection of its pace? If it is, they're in trouble. But I don't think anyone, least of all, for example, McLaren, think it really was. They think that Ferrari's a really quick car and they just didn't get the best out of it. The strategy, it reminded some people of Ferrari of old, the sort of Ferrari that Fred Vasseur was supposed to have banished, gambling on crazy tyre choices, a bit like they did with Leclerc in Silverstone last year when they fitted him on Inters on a dry track, hoping it was going to rain. In fact, we kind of heard Lando Norris heading in that direction and having to be talked down from it during the Australia race, which just shows how easy it is to get it wrong when you're trying to preempt weather that you know is coming, but when is it coming and what's it look like? But I think they ended up in that situation because they were grasping for straws. You know, they were not having a great race. They thought, well, maybe we can pull a rabbit out of the hat here. And obviously it didn't work out. So I think this weekend and the next 2 or 3 are really important for them to get a grasp of where they really are. It looks like it's going to be dry all weekend. It's not ideal that it's a sprint race, so they can't play around with setups, but they need to settle down and just get a sense of what's going on with their car. What level of competitiveness are there? There's a good combination of tracks coming up here, Suzuka and Bahrain, to get a sense of that over the next 3 Grand Prix weekends, over the next 4 weekends in time. So let's see where they end up.
Yeah, well, it is, in terms of weather, it's supposed to be a little bit more of a straightforward weekend with dry conditions forecast. This is the sound of Hamilton. We're just getting a replay, him coming through the final corner and really hugging the inside towards the pit wall. Did he run out a little bit wide coming out of the final corner? No, ran over the curbs, but the car running low, sparks flying from the underside of that red Ferrari.
Yeah, now we've got Lando Norris jumping on the brakes into 14, just struggling to get the car stopped, running slightly wide, and I wonder if this is where he's going to peel into the pits. He did do fastest of anybody in the first and second sector. Pierre Gasly struggling to get the car stopped. So they're all struggling to get the car stopped going down into 14, the heaviest braking zone on the circuit. It's a crosswind there, so there's no headwind or tailwind, so it shouldn't be too tricky to get it stopped in terms of that. But one driver I'm just having a look at, and who we've mentioned that needs a better weekend, is Liam Lawson, and currently he's down in 19th place, 2.9 seconds off the pace, 2.5 seconds off his teammate Max Verstappen. I've been looking at the sectors, Harry, and it doesn't look like he's been making any major mistakes. He just seems to be struggling for pace, and that's definitely not what Red Bull brought him in for. They've taken a risk in bringing Lawson in instead of Yuki Tsunoda, and at the moment Lawson's certainly not living up to the expectation that will be on his shoulders by Red Bull.
No, Liam Lawson ended up retiring from the Australian Grand Prix. When do we have that conversation? Well, I'll tell you when we'll have it right now. It's not the driver in that second Red Bull seat, it's the team, it's the environment. How can you possibly have so many different drivers of decent caliber all falling by the wayside? Surely at some point you have to question, are Red Bull not able to provide a capable car that can win races and world champions with an exceptional driver and be good and score points and podiums with the other driver? Why is there always such a big disparity between both?
Well, I think it's a combination of circumstances, Harry, and it reminds me actually a little bit of the Benetton era with Michael Schumacher in the mid-90s. The bottom line is that Max Verstappen is a genius-level driver, and whoever was in the second car, and I mean whoever, would find it difficult to beat him over a season. But he's so exceptional that you're going to need a proper top-line driver to get in there and lap within a couple of tenths of him, or 3/10 of him, which is what they want. And when the field's so close, if you can't lap within 2 or 3/10 of Verstappen, then you're going, and the car isn't the quickest on the grid, which it doesn't appear to be, then you're going to be qualifying at the back of the top 8, basically, the top 4 teams. And therefore, you're not going to be able to do the job that Red Bull want you to do, which is to back Verstappen up and take points off his championship rivals. George Russell's just gone fastest, followed by Charles Leclerc and Ferrari, and Hamilton's third at the moment. And so that's problem number one. Then the issue is that they don't pick those sorts of drivers. They don't go for Leclerc, Hamilton, Russell, Norris, Sainz. They could have had Sainz last year. And they chose not to have Sainz because they were worried about the dynamics within the team. Now, the word in the paddock is that the Verstappens blocked Red Bull from signing Sainz. Jos Verstappen tells me that's absolutely not true. He made it clear to them that he didn't mind who was going to be in the other car. But Sainz actually out-qualified Verstappen, believe it or not, on average, when they were teammates in Toro Rosso in 2015. I'm not saying he necessarily would do again, but that is the fact. Verstappen was more impressive in races, but they were quite closely matched, which just suggests that, Verstappen can be matched by really good quality drivers. But they don't pick those kind of quality drivers. They pick second-string drivers. And they're not going to get within that margin of Verstappen. And so they end up in a kind of spiral where they can't get close to Verstappen, and they keep trying to get close to Verstappen, and they get worse and worse and worse because the confidence goes down. Then there's the car. Verstappen likes a very particular kind of racing car, in the same way that Michael Schumacher did, which is why I made that analogy. He wants a really, really sharp front end, and he'll deal with the rear as long as it's predictable. Unpredictable is a different thing, which is what he was complaining about last year, a disconnection with the balance and everything. But as long as he feels confident in what the rear is going to do, he doesn't mind that it's loose, he doesn't mind that the car turns on a dime. Very few drivers want to drive like that, and Alex can maybe expand on that point in a minute. More of them want more stability, more predictability. Albon, after he finished at Red Bull, he described it as like turning up your computer mouse or your game controller to the absolute maximum level of sensitivity, to the where if you just turn, it feels like the car's just going to go on you. And so that compounds the problem for those drivers who are not that good. Or not, when I say not that good, we're talking about on a quantum level. At Formula One, the peak of Formula One is so high, the quality of drivers, teams and everything, that the gaps between drivers are sort of magnified as a result. So someone like Fernando Alonso, for example, who can drive any kind of car famously, he's the kind of guy who might be able to get into a Red Bull and deal with that, find a way of driving around it. But most sort of good quality Formula One drivers can't do that. So you add those two things to that combination of things together, and you end up in this sort of doom loop of their own making, Red Bull, if you like. But the problem is, I don't understand why Red Bull don't understand that. It's like the definition of madness. You keep doing the same thing and expecting a different result. Nothing's going to change until they change their approach. Alice, maybe you can expand on that driving thing I was talking about.
Yeah, and we're just looking at a replay as well of Yuki Tsunoda's rear wing as DRS is open, flapping everywhere. He's just popped up into the top 10, but he'll have to box for a fix of the rear wing there. But no, you're 100% right, Andrew. Every driver has a driving style, a unique driving style to them. They have to be adaptable, whether that's to changing conditions or to the car. But what makes it so tough for the drivers that hop into Red Bull is coming from junior categories where car development is only done by setup. It's not done by making your own bits for the car. Formula 2, it's all a one-make series. So they will adjust to go faster by working with their engineers to tune the setup, but also drive with their feet, affect the balance of the car by using their hands and their feet, whether they want to induce some more rotation in the rear, whether they want to induce some understeer, depending on how the car is feeling. But the situation with Red Bull is the bits that are designed for that car are quite specific to Max's driving style. So it's hard for anyone to really come in unless they like, as you said, that really pointy front end, which is quite unique for a lot of drivers to want to have such a pointy front end, because it just doesn't give necessarily certain drivers the confidence as you're turning in the rear wanting to come round. But Max is that's just how he drives. It's hard for then drivers to come in and get used to that and then make setup changes when that's kind of how the car is designed to go quickly for that type of driving style.
Yeah, it's not like they're designing the car for Verstappen. It's just that he's their lead driver. So he'll come in and say, and drivers basically come in, and what they do with their engineers is tell them how I can go faster. What do I need to go faster? And some of them are better at explaining that accurately. Some of them are more correct about what they say than others. Some of them are better at their feedback than others. Some of them understand why the car's behaving in that way more than others. Some of them don't realise that it's them inducing the understeer because of something they're doing on the entry to the corner, as opposed to the car actually understeering. Anyway, the point is that Verstappen will often he'll obviously come back to the pits and say, I can go quicker if you give me more front end. And that will be the feedback. So they'll go and design something that gives him more front grip, because that's what he's saying will make him faster. But all that's doing is making it harder and harder for the other driver to drive the car quickly.
So ultimately, Liam Lawson is doomed.
Well, we'll see, but it's not looking great at the moment, is it? It's the 17th place.
And the other point, which actually producer Joe says, if Lawson goes, who's next for the chopping block? Are they going to put Hadjar in? Because they're not putting Tsunoda anywhere near that car. They've made that abundantly clear.
Do you know, it wouldn't surprise me that they'll stick Hadjar in, because they clearly don't rate Yuki Tsunoda and aren't confident with sticking him in the car. So you'd be turning to Isaac Hadjar.
But Helmut Marko had some pretty choice words for him after his opening gambit. Didn't even start the race.
He certainly did, and I definitely don't agree with what Helmut Marko said regarding Hadjar. Everyone deals with situations differently, and we know, and me and you, Harry, have worked on the feeder series and commentated on Isaac, because he's been coming up the ranks in Formula 3 and Formula 2, that he is an emotional driver. He's very emotional on the radio, that iconic radio at Monza where he crashed in qualifying.
That is the thing that sticks out for me on his final flying lap.
I'm not going to try and repeat the radio and do an impression, but it was emotional, and that's how he is, and every driver is different, and drivers should be allowed to express that kind of emotion. And for him getting upset on what was a very important day for him and his career, his first ever Formula 1 race, which he didn't even get to start. Yes, it was his mistake, it was his fault, but he has the right to show that emotion and get upset. And I don't agree with Helmut Marko, but there we go. Yeah, I
mean, just to be clear for everybody who might not know, so basically Hadjar crashed on the formation lap in Australia, which is, something that no Formula 1 driver wanted to do. It is, as Hadjar himself said yesterday, it is embarrassing, however hard these cars are to drive. And he got out of the car and stood behind the barrier, and it looked to all the world like he was crying. He had his head down, his fingers inside his visor, and whether he was actually crying or not, I don't know, but it does rather look like he was. And Helmut Marko, in an interview with Austrian television, said it was embarrassing. Well, as Hadjar said, he was embarrassed. So, and Alice is right. Why can't you show emotion? It's his first Grand Prix, and he knows he's done something really, really stupid. He's entitled to react emotionally to that, I think. He's 20, 21 years old? Still a kid, really. But Helmut's renowned for being, tough as nails and not exactly Mr. Reconstructed. No. So,
I thought Isaac handled himself quite well, not only in his response on the media day to being asked that question and how did he feel about being called out by Helmut Marko that way, but also in general. I actually thought up until that point in Australia, Hadjar had showed well, decent performance relative to his teammate, only just missed out on qualifying in the top 10, and I think he was one of the rookies that actually pleasantly surprised people with his pace and results. And could well, ultimately Tsunoda didn't get any points either, but that was more of a team issue than his, but it could have been in another life a double point score for Racing Bulls.
It could have, and it certainly, he is doing a great job, and as you said, was good comparison to his teammate. He also missed out on vital track time. It's not often in Formula One we see races in these kind of mixed conditions, and Melbourne's a known track for being slippy. He wasn't the only one to make mistakes. Look at Sainz crashing under safety car, and how many races he's got under his belt.
Well,
so
only 14 drivers finished the race in the end.
It's tough. We hear from Gasly.
Guys, all the switches are wrong on this wheel.
Copy that, mate. We'll work our way through it.
It's Pierre Gasly with not a switch on any wheel as he makes his way around, so he'll be making his way back to the pits in his pink and blue Alpine.
So I think what's ironic about this situation at Red Bull with their second driver is that they don't seem to have learned the lessons of the past. It seems to me that their most effective driver lineups were the ones that did exactly what they don't want to do now. So Vettel against Webber was full of tension through 2009 to 2013. Everyone will remember, not bad for number 2 driver.
It was good, wasn't it?
Controversy about taking his Webber's wing off his car and putting on Vettel's car.
Multi-21
and all that. The crash at Turkey in 2010 when Vettel was trying to overtake Webber and he changed his line and all that stuff. That was like proper box office racing. And then Ricciardo and Verstappen together, that got a bit tasty from time to time, refusing team orders, crashing into each other in Baku, and then the way Christian Horner handled that was one of the main reasons Daniel Ricciardo ended up leaving Red Bull. Since then, they've not wanted to have that level of competition in the team, but not having that competition in the team has created a situation that we've just spent the last 5 minutes talking about. So I think they need to. I might want to think, in my humble opinion, about revisiting that approach. But the issue remains Verstappen. He is so good that if you want that inter-team competition, you're going to have a really, really good driver. And then that really good driver is not going to want to be in a sort of number 1.5 situation where he's asked to back up Verstappen's championship challenge, because why would he? So they're a bit stuck until Verstappen leaves. And then actually...
Which could be sooner rather than later.
Could be sooner rather than later. And if Verstappen leaves and the car isn't that good, which is what looks to be the case at the moment, then they've got a different kind of problem altogether. So we'll see what happens on that one.
They've got a young junior coming up through the ranks as well in the form of Arvin Lindblad, who it seems to be making a lot of noises around being on a similar level to a Verstappen, a Kimi Antonelli. So that could well prove another problem in a year or so's time, or even this year, as they're trying to get special dispensation for him to get his super license. He's got enough points for it, but he's not turned 18 yet. Doesn't do that until the end of the year. Mercedes managed to get dispensation last year for Kimi Antonelli, so Red Bull are really trying to get this youngster Lindblad in and getting some crucial track time in a current Formula One car. But for Liam Lawson then, at the moment he is all the way down in 19th. He's currently in the pits, so hasn't set a lap time as others have gone quicker. Max Verstappen is 5th fastest with less than half an hour to go of this first and only free practice session. It's George Russell who leads the way with a 1:32.377 ahead of Charles Leclerc. Hamilton, Antonelli, Verstappen is 5th. Then it's Piastri, Norris, Sainz, Tsunoda and Albon rounds out the top 10. Alonso is 11th ahead of Pierre Gasly. Ocon, Stroll and Hulkenberg is 15th ahead of Isaac Hadjar. Jack Doohan is 17th ahead of Ollie Behrman. Then comes the aforementioned Liam Lawson, and Gabriel Bortoleto is currently 20th and last for the Sauber team. Just want to move things to the other side of the grid and talk about what a disaster of a start it's been for the Haas team. Ollie Behrman, well, let's hear from Alonso first.
So we do think that snapshot was in the tailwind.
Yeah, but it's for everybody. I mean, it's not the wind following us.
Fernando Alonso on the radio being told why he had a snap on the car, but it's not unique to him. And we just see Lando Norris have a little snap as well. And right at the start, we saw the flags on the top of the main pit building fluttering. So the wind speed is fairly steady and picking up throughout this session.
I'm just going to pick up on Fernando Alonso's radio transmission there, because it implies that Aston Martin are not having a particularly happy time. If you remember last last year, the big problem with the car was, apart from the fact that they were bringing updates that weren't working, was that the drivers were finding it unpredictable. And their main target for this year was to make a more predictable car that they could then develop and give themselves the confidence that they knew what they were doing going into 2026 and the new regulations, which, of course, Adrian Newey's now in situ at Aston Martin. But the implication to me in Alonso's radio message there, I don't know whether Alice picked it up, he was basically saying, you're blaming the wind for the snap, and I don't think it was the wind, I think it was the car. And therefore...
that excuse won't fly with me.
Exactly, we've got unpredictability here, and we were talking about feedback a while ago, and whether, how drivers tell the teams what they want and so on. He's someone who, Andrea Stella once said to me about Fernando Alonso, 99% of his feedback is in the first 3 words when he comes back to the pits, and because he's so clear and good at knowing exactly what he needs to be fast. And there might be other issues as well, but he'll zero in on the one thing and say, this is what you need to look at, and he won't talk about the other things. And there's a good example of it. You're saying to me one thing and I'm saying no, this is something else altogether.
Well, work to do for Fernando Alonso and Aston Martin there, and he had a good run here last year, did Alonso. Qualified third for both the main Grand Prix and the sprint race. Didn't quite get the results to back it up, but had some great wheel-to-wheel fighting with Carlos Sainz in the Ferrari this time last year. Here's Hamilton in the Ferrari.
Suggestion for turn 14, Bibal 61, BMIC 5. For turn 14, 1-4, Bibal 61.
I just got 2 different messages just now.
I don't know whether that was crossing on to the wrong channel for Hamilton, but it's not distracted him too much. A personal best in the middle sector, but not too many people really improving with 23 minutes of the session remaining, and that McLaren's looking quite tricky for Lando Norris, who's down in 7th place at the moment. Hamilton, if he can string it together, could pop in front of his teammate, but his first sector is not fantastic. A lot of Ferrari fans and Hamilton fans out there in the grandstands. Oscar Piastri is making his way round. He's just slightly ahead, just over half a tenth in front of his teammate in 6th place, and he has set a personal best in the first sector and the middle sector, so he could move slightly further up the order, and is slightly ahead at the moment on this lap of George Russell, who's the top of the times.
Harry, you wanted to talk about Haas, I believe.
Oh, yeah. Got distracted.
I interrupted you.
Oh, yeah. I love a midfield to back Marcus Story. But for Haas, disaster of a start of the year. I think they knew they'd be off the pace, but they did not expect to be as slow as they were. And we mentioned a tough weekend for rookies as well for Behrman. I think Aya Komatsu described it as an uncharacteristically messy weekend in Melbourne for Ollie Behrman, who'll be looking, and so far has had a cleaner start of it at the moment. But for Haas, they seem like they're at a complete loss to explain their lack of pace. They thought something was broken, it wasn't, and whatever it is, there is no short-term issue here. Short-term fix, I should say.
What they're basically saying is they've got high-speed instability, which they didn't discover in Bahrain. They were doing a lot of high fuel running in Bahrain pre-season testing. They got to Australia and they were miles off in the high-speed corners, and it seems there's some kind of instability in the aerodynamics that they're not going to be able to fix just like that. How they've ended up, I think, like that is a bigger question. Because there's no obvious reason why they should suddenly have lost their way with their high-speed aerodynamic.
Well, I wonder, they had such a big, big changes in their technical team and on the pit wall side as well. They announced huge changes to their lineup. I wonder if that maybe plays a small factor.
I don't know. They were mostly around kind of like race engineering type things rather than design, if I remember rightly. That I remember seeing the board in the Haas factory over the winter. There have been a lot of changes, but it doesn't feel like to me like that was a design thing, but. Anyway, they found themselves in a bit of a pickle, there's no doubt about that, and they're actually not doing too badly. Ocon's 13th at the moment, and Ollie Behrman's down in 18th, but I think in the context of what Ayo Komatsu, the team principal, was saying yesterday, not Leclerc, is that off?
Yeah, I think it's the Charles Leclerc
Turn
Ferrari in turn 1, facing the wrong way and rejoining the track. His tyres covered in gravel. We just caught the back end of it, so he's clearly had a skirmish into the gravel, run out wide and had a spin, but he's back onto the circuit and trying to scrub off his tyres, but left them in a rather messy way with not too much of a reaction. A sturdy look from his engineer Brian Botzi on the pit wall, just watching his driver recover back on to the circuit. Charles Leclerc currently second fastest out there. This is the sound of the Monegasque making his way down to turn 1. Let's have a listen in as he slings it into the right-hander, keeps it turned in, and then just loses the back end as he approaches over the crest before it dives down into the right-hander, and round he goes, Alice.
Yeah, such a long right-hand corner. The left-hand side of those tyres are absolutely screaming, and he just lost the rear quite late on in the corner. We've seen a lot of the snaps be much slightly earlier, certainly for Lando Norris a couple of laps earlier. Had a huge moment on the way into turn 1, but a shake of the head from some of the mechanics in the Ferrari garage. Leclerc, he's sitting P2 at the moment, but did that lap several laps ago, but struggling to make any improvements. And talking of Haas, they are out. On track is Ollie Behrman. He sweeps now into turn 1. As Andrew mentioned, he's down in 18th place at the moment, 3/10 off his teammate Esteban Ocon. Let's hear from Antonelli.
Unblistering front left.
And we see other cars struggling with the front left.
Yeah, front left is gone.
And blistering basically means that tyre is on its way out, and the front left takes a huge hammering, particularly round turn 1. These long, demanding, sweeping corners out of 11 through 12 as well, and that sounds like Antonelli's really screaming. It's going to be a trend of the weekend, Harry, with the left-hand side for these drivers. Their Pirelli tyres, they take a big beating round here.
So just to go back to Haas, this is what Ayo Komatsu was saying yesterday to the media. He was talking about the car's balance problems through turn 10 at Melbourne. Turn 10 is the second part of that high-speed left-right combination around the middle of the back of the track. He said through turn 10, the downforce, let's say the driver can extract, is probably the same as we had in Melbourne last year, even though the performance we have on the car at that speed is so much higher potentially. You can't extract it because it's just not usable. Now that's a classic example of a team that has gone after peak downforce without really understanding the consequences of what that's going to do on track. So you can create higher downforce numbers, particularly with these ground effect cars. But if it doesn't give the driver the confidence that the car's going to stick to the track because it's bouncing or because it's nervous and unstable, then he's never going to be able to use that performance. And this is one of the qualities of Adrian Newey. He's always understood that the downforce you've got has got to be predictable and usable, and it's better to have a little bit less downforce that's there all the time than potentially a higher peak in theory that the driver just can't use because he feels like the car's going to spit him off the track all the time. And I think in that context, we didn't know this at the time in Melbourne last weekend, but I think you've got to judge Ollie Behrman's errors a bit differently than last weekend. You know, it looked like a guy just pushing too hard. Hamilton's just gone off into what used to be the gravel trap that ruined his 2007 championship chances.
I've had flashbacks all of a sudden in
on the
black and white.
Pit lane, but now it's asphalt, so he's escaped and gone back and now returned to the Ferrari pit.
But he wished it was asphalt back then.
But he lost the car, if you remember, on Friday practice in turn 10. That's exactly where it was, and crashed. And then the next morning, on his first flying lap, he lost it in the next corner, turn 11, which is a 6th gear corner. So it looks like it's a right angle corner, but it's still really quick. Turn 6, not as quick as turn 10, but still really quick. So yes, he was pushing too hard, and yes, he should have backed it off a bit in the context of the weekend and his first Grand Prix and all the rest of it. But now we know that the car's got that aerodynamic unpredictability. I think we can give him a bit more slack than perhaps some people might have been giving him last weekend.
Yeah, I think so. The car clearly not in the right place for Behrman or indeed Esteban Ocon to get the most out of it. Couldn't get any points in Australia. Jack Doohan is one of the other rookies in the field. He's out on track at the moment. Most cars doing their long run pace now. Doohan was another driver who succumbed to the conditions, Alice, in Melbourne. It was such a shame for the home driver, one of two, of course, along with Oscar Piastri, but with a lot of pressure on Doohan coming into the year before it even started. I mean, you worked closely with the Alpine Academy over the last couple of years. How do you think Doohan got on as a whole over the weekend?
Well, it started off well. He was matching, if not faster, than Pierre Gasly, but then it sort of started to unravel as the weekend went on, not having the strongest of qualifying sessions compared to his teammate, and then again that error, he said, just a bit too keen with that throttle foot, rear tyres maybe not quite up to temperature, and also on those white lines as well. But I think it was more just the tyres not being in the right window. And as you said, a driver that's under so much pressure, so much talk of Colapinto possibly coming in after 6 races. He is under a lot of pressure, and he has to deliver, and I just hope that Alpine do give him enough time. I think he is a talent. He's had a bit of a struggle coming up through some of the junior categories, certainly particularly in Formula 2. He was quite unlucky in his second season, but he looks like he's struggling with the rear of his Alpine there on the exit of turn 3, getting all out of shape as he applies the throttle. But he is slightly behind his teammate. He's 14th position at the moment. Bortoleto, we're just seeing, runs slightly wide on the exit of the final corner, but a lot of pressure under all of these, on top of all these rookies' shoulders. We're just seeing that blistering, Harry, on the front left that Antonelli was talking about.
Now, do you know the advantage that Jack Doohan has over the other rookies this weekend? Any guesses? Any takers?
No, as well. I mean, no. I'm looking at Andrew. I was thinking he's having a good. I can see the clogs turning in his head. Has he?
Oh, just hang on before we come to that. Yellow flag out on track, and it's for Jack Doohan.
I have an issue. No power steering. Power is switched off. Let me know your instructions.
Well, nice clear messages of communication from Doohan. Harry? Yeah, that advantage has gone right out the window. Doohan is off though, and he's getting out of the car, and that is disaster. That's on the approach to turn 11. He's pulled right off, and that has brought out the red flag actually. So everybody has to come back to the pits. Only Piastri actually remains out on track, his Australian compatriot. But Doohan is out of the car, putting the steering wheel back, and is just treading carefully as he jumps clear of his stricken blue and pink Alpine and walks away. So he hasn't had any contact, he's just parked it up and lost complete power, and has obviously been instructed to get out of the car, and walks away with 12 minutes and 45 seconds on the clock remaining. His advantage was that he's the only rookie to have ever had any kind of track time around this circuit. He raced here in the Asian F3 series, won here about 6 years ago. No other rookie has actually ever turned a wheel in anger until this morning's session. There you go. But it's clearly not panned out for Jack Doohan in the way he wanted either. So Doohan then out of this session. The clock continues to count down in practice with a red flag. So crucially, track time being lost for everybody. But in the latter part of this, the main focus, I suppose now, Alice, for Doohan and Alpine is what is the issue, and can they get it sorted in time for sprint qualifying?
That's a very good point. Sprint qualifying is not too far away as Jack's standing there, hands on hips. He'll be relieved that it's an issue with the car and not him sending it into a spin or into the wall. But he sounded like there was no way that he could reset the car to get that back going. So not a lot of time as the tractor comes along to hoist the car up in the air and move it to safety, as Briatore watched on, followed by Franco Colapinto as well.
Immediate cut to Franco Colapinto from the TV director there. This is the sound on board. Let's just take a listen. And there he goes. That's it, cutting out as he comes in to the left-hander of turn 9. The first of a double left-hander, turn 9, and then he pulls off on the exit of turn 10 and just completely cuts off without a word of warning.
Yeah, electrical issue for sure, and you could see he was moving the wheel left to right to just try and see if there was anything going on. The power steering kicked out, he said, car cut off through the middle of the corner. He's kind of lucky that didn't happen directly through a high-speed apex, because that could have sent him into a spin. So luckily for him, it was in between the two corners. As he's hopped on the back of a moped now, he'll be driven back to the garage. He's only a tenth off his teammate, so he's doing a pretty decent job out there. The teammate that is, or the driver that is closest to his teammate in terms of rookie driver to non-rookie teammate, Charles Leclerc, they're all as well, is back in the garage, of course. Mechanics working on the back of the car, making some changes. The only changes that they'll be able to make, of course, this is the only free practice session we're going to get. But George Russell, who set that lap time early on, his streaks ahead of everybody else at the top of the field, so really extracted some good pace out of his Mercedes. His teammate Antonelli is 9/10 off, down in 5th place, but half a second, 4/10 should I say, clear of Charles Leclerc is George Russell at the top of the times.
It certainly is. Had a run to the podium in Melbourne and quietly went about his business, really, and kept it out of the walls and managed to come home with the spoils at the end of it. And as a result, Mercedes and McLaren are actually tied at the top of the Constructors' Championship, with McLaren getting, Norris with the win and Piastri a few points in his recovery. But of course, it was Russell third and Antonelli just behind him. That's how they bagged all their points. Let's hear from George Russell and see how far Mercedes, or McLaren actually, are ahead of them.
Fortunately, yes, for the time being. They're doing an amazing job, and we need to try and find out what that little trick is that they've found, because they've even sort of extended the gap on last year, which is pretty damn impressive. And I think afterwards, I think it's anybody's game between us, Red Bull and Ferrari. I don't think Ferrari really showed their true potential last week. I think things went slightly away from them, and I'm sure once Lewis gets his head around the new car, he'll be fully on it as well. So it was a good weekend for us, but we're not going into this weekend expecting that it'll be plain sailing for another podium.
So George Russell speaking there, still thinks McLaren are clear of the rest of the field, and while it was a good weekend for Mercedes, they have got work to do. And George Russell now just sitting in the pit lane waiting for the green light to come back on. We should be getting underway in a few moments time now that Jack Doohan's car has been cleared, and Doohan has made it back to the pit lane for with helmet off and walking back to his Alpine garage. Right, I think we are back underway. The clock is continuing to count down, and everybody then queuing up and ready to get going in these last 7 minutes and 38 seconds remaining, with George Russell fastest ahead of Charles Leclerc, Piastri, Hamilton, Antonelli is 5th, Verstappen, Norris, Sainz, Tsunoda is currently 9th, and it's his teammate Isaac Hadjar who is just trying to peek out from his pit box and cut into the queue. His mechanic is just telling him when to go, and had a little moment there with the Haas just getting out before him, so Hadjar just having to bide his time before he gets out. So Tsunoda, his teammate, is 9th ahead of Albon, then it's Alonso in 11th, Gasly, Ocon, Doohan, Stroll is 15th, Hulkenberg 16th, Hadjar is in 17th, with Behrman, Lawson and Gabriel Bortoleto making up the 20 drivers that are taking part in this session, now down to 19, with Jack Doohan's sudden loss of power in his Alpine causing a momentary red flag. He's now back into the pits, and we're back underway for these final few moments. Now, I just want to get, I know it's early in the morning in the UK, and Andrew, you might be the best person to input on this. We saw a few times in this session the likes of the Racing Bull DRS flap, absolutely flapping in the wind, but also a couple of close-ups on the McLaren rear wing, and news coming in straight after the Australian Grand Prix, really on the Monday, is that the FIA have tweaked the rear wing deflection tests for this weekend for a stricter test, essentially, after analysing the goings-on in Melbourne. What more do we know on this?
Well, there was already a stricter test in place for Australia, Harry, because of what happened over last season with various degrees of flexibility in various wings. There was a new test brought in for rear wings in Australia, and there's a new test coming in for front wings at the Spanish Grand Prix in June. What was happening in Australia was the FIA were analysing the movement of wings through the course of the weekend with high-res cameras and little dots painted on the wings, believe it or not. And they say they saw enough evidence in Australia to want to toughen up that test, so reduce the amount of flexibility that was permitted. So basically, for Australia, there was allowed to be a 2 millimetre gap open between the main plane of the wing and the flap when the DRS wasn't deployed, and they reduced that to 0.5 millimetres for this weekend, although they've just for this race only, they've added in a 0.25 millimetre tolerance to give the teams, a bit of leeway because it was such short notice. Now, this whole process has happened because of Red Bull basically working behind the scenes, because they believe that McLaren have been exploiting wing flexibility, which is something that all teams have played with for a long time. And ironically, Red Bull were the sort of acknowledged masters of it 10 years or so ago. Doesn't appear to be the case anymore. But Lando Norris was saying yesterday that they would have, I should emphasise, by the way, the FIA said that all the cars were compliant with the regulations in Australia. Sorry, I just spoke over some radio, I think, there that we popped in though. And Norris said yesterday that he didn't believe the test was directed at them because they didn't have to do anything to their wing for this weekend. Now, you can take that with a pinch of salt if you want or not. I'm sure Red Bull will have done, but we'll have to see whether this has any effect. But and I'm not saying it won't, but my experience of these things is quite often that there's a lot of fuss caused about it, but it doesn't really make much difference at the end of the day.
Well, Lando Norris has just gone second. He was asked exactly that, if McLaren were going to be impacted. Here's exactly what he said.
We don't have to change anything. Ours is fine. In fact, ours was probably too good, and we probably are not pushing the limits enough, honestly. So, no, already if this technical directive was applied for last weekend, we'd also be fine. So it's not directed at us, it seems. It's directed at all other teams. Which probably means we need to push it a little bit more.
Well, there we go. The FIA then continuing to clamp down, but Lando Norris doesn't think it should impact him or his team too much. We'll continue to monitor that as it unfolds, and indeed the Spanish Grand Prix also stricter processes will be implemented. 2 minutes and 45 seconds remaining, and every driver sticking on the quick rubber, the soft tyre, the red-walled Pirelli rubber, to show us what they've got, perhaps for a bit of a qualifying simulation, because the next session we have will be a qualifying for the sprint race, and it's Charles Leclerc who is currently fastest, half a tenth clear of Lando Norris. Hamilton third, Russell is fourth, then it's Piastri, Albon, Alonso, Antonelli, Behrman and Pierre Gasly is the top 10 ahead of Carlos Sainz. Esteban Ocon is 12th. Max Verstappen was on a lap, but then he just came into the pits at the end of it.
Not showing their hand, maybe.
Yeah, he wasn't only on a lap, he was on a lap that was about to go fastest, which is interesting that he aborted that.
Hajar down in 15th. His teammate Yuki Tsunoda about 4 tenths up on him inside the top 10. Lawson out there on the soft tyre, just about to start another lap. So at the moment he is still down in 17th. Tough morning's work for Liam Lawson. Hulkenberg 18th. No Jack Doohan, the car conking out on him in the Alpine, and Gabriel Bortoleto 20th and last for Sauber, despite scoring points last time out in the hands of Nico Hulkenberg. I think Sauber both agreed that was a bit of luck coming their way. Their car not capable of scoring points on a regular basis. So indeed, actually, with scoring those points for Nico Hulkenberg, 6 points he picked up for Sauber. That's more than the team managed throughout the entirety of 2024, where Zhou Guanyu managed to pick up 4 points for them. So already, even though it was a luck in for them, they've managed to beat their total from last year at the end of round 1.
Lando Norris winding up for another lap now. Let's hear from him.
The main opportunity is turn 8.
Yeah, I know this one is.
Okay.
Well, just letting you know, Lando, and actually his middle sector, which does have turn 8, it's a right-hand sweeper before the 90 left into turn 9. His middle sector was pretty slow, to be honest. He was half a second off Lewis Hamilton, and it wasn't even a personal best for him in that sector. He's on the soft tyre now, along with everyone else out there at the moment. So he's not personal best in the first sector, but it's nearly matching his best there as he's sweeping round through into turn 9 now. So hopefully for him, he's improved turn 8 as he heads down into turn 11, which was the parking place for Jack Doohan's stricken Alpine earlier on. And there we go, he clearly has improved turn 8 somewhere along the line, because he's purple, so fastest of anybody in that middle sector, which is actually just over a tenth and a half faster than what Lewis Hamilton set a couple of laps ago. So he heads down the straight into the heavy braking zone of turn 14. It feels like a long time when you're sat on that straight, braking around about 90 metres, and that McLaren turned in lovely for Lando. And to the end of the lap now, is he going to do a Verstappen and peel into the pits? No. Through the final corner, DRS flicks open and moves him up the top of the times. A very impressive final sector there, 6 tenths clear of Charles Leclerc, who's just then, as I say that, gone slightly faster, but he's still 4 tenths clear. Oscar Piastri, Harry, has ran wide, but still manages to jump up into third place, only 6 tenths off. So what could have been for Oscar, because that was a pretty slow final sector for him, running wide at the gravel there. So looking strong for McLaren.
Yeah, the checkered flag is now out. So final lap times being completed. George Russell comes across the line and stays down in 5th. He didn't put on the soft tyre at this stage, stayed on the medium. Nico Hulkenberg in the Sauber is next across the line round the final corner and jumps up to 6th place for the Sauber team. About a second off Lando Norris's pace though. So the man who took first blood in Melbourne, who currently leads the Drivers' Championship as a result, is fastest at the end of FP1. The only practice session our 20 drivers will get, because it's a sprint weekend, the first of 6 this season, which means later on today we will get into qualifying for the sprint, and you can hear that in full over on 5 Sports Extra. We'll be on air from 7:25 in the morning. This is Piastri running wide in the final corner.
Do you know what, that was going to be a pretty decent lap, because he lost a lot of time running wide there, kicking up all the gravel onto the track for the next driver to come round and scoop up onto their hot sticky tyres. Having a look at a replay of Lando through turn 1, and there was certainly more pace for him in there as he skated slightly wide of the apex. So that McLaren looking particularly handy. Certainly both drivers making errors on their fastest laps. So a warning sign to the rest of the field. It would have been interesting to see what Verstappen would have done, but looking at the first and second sector, Harry, he was a little bit off what the McLarens and the Ferrari of Charles Leclerc were setting.
Practice starts then underway. Max Verstappen, was that ominous, lining up in the pole position point. Lando Norris just behind him. Norris finished FP1 fastest ahead of Charles Leclerc. Oscar Piastri third, Hamilton fourth, George Russell rounded out the top 5. Nico Hülkenberg with a good lap at the end in the Sauber up to 6th ahead of Alex Albon's Williams. Fernando Alonso in the Aston Martin 8th ahead of Kimi Antonelli's Mercedes, with Yuki Tsunoda in the Racing Bulls rounding out the top 10. Ollie Behrman's Haas, a much better start to the weekend for him at round 2, finished in 11th ahead of Stroll. Esteban Ocon 13th, Pierre Gasly's Alpine was 14th ahead of Carlos Sainz, down in 15th. Max Verstappen ended that session down in 16th ahead of Isaac Hadjar. Liam Lawson in 18th, so both Red Bulls languishing towards the back. Gabriel Bortoleto 19th, with Jack doing 20th. Didn't get a quick run at the end of that session after power issues in that Alpine completely conking out on him, causing a red flag and pulling up and out of the session for the Australian. Okay, Alice, next up, we're going to go qualifying for the sprint, and it does feel like it is advantage McLaren right now, but Ferrari not too far away, and we've not seen properly what Red Bull have yet. It's setting us up quite nicely.
It certainly is. George Russell actually set his fastest lap time of the session on the medium tyre. He did go out on the soft tyre, but for some reason didn't seem to find some time on that soft, which is unusual because it's certainly the grippier tyre and the better tyre for one lap pace. So maybe there's a little bit more pace in that Mercedes, but of course we didn't see what Max Verstappen was able to do as he peeled into the pits. But at the moment it's certainly looking like the two McLarens will battle it out for pole position for the sprint.
First bit of track action then done on the Shanghai International Circuit to kickstart the Chinese Grand Prix weekend. A sprint weekend, and that is the next session we will have, qualifying for the sprint. You can join us on 5 Sports Extra from 7:25 this morning, ahead of the session starting at past. Who will get sprint pole? Thanks to Andrew, thanks to Alice. This has been an IMG production for BBC Radio 5 Live.